Those decrepit basking fools in Arcades tie my hands, and look what happens. I tell you, this country's obstinacy knows no bounds.
I'm always sort of disappointed whenever people discuss the best villains in the Final Fantasy franchise, and this guy isn't among them. A lot of people tend to write off Final Fantasy XII because of how non-fantastic the plot is and how it mostly deals with war and politics, but that's precisely one of the reasons why I love it so much. After the more elaborate existential plots of 7, 8, 9, and 10, I honestly found this kind of a refreshing change of pace, and this is perfectly reflected in its villain, Vayne Solador. Vayne is the third son of Emperor Gramus of Arcadia. However, his two older brothers were found to be traitors and killed, although Vayne may or may not have been behind that. As such, only he and his youngest brother Larsa are left, and Vayne is set to inherit the throne. Remember a few videos back when I talked about Dr. Cid and the Acuria and the plan to put the reins of history back in the hands of men? Vayne is one of the architects of that plan. He orchestrated an invasion into the country of Dalmasca in order to gain their vast amounts of nethicite to use against the Acuria, in the process getting himself appointed consul. Here's the thing about Vayne, though. He does care about the plan to defeat the Acuria and bring the reins of history back into the hands of men, but he also knows that world domination is a pretty sweet bonus. You see, House Solador has been losing power within the Imperial Senate for quite a while. The Senate wants to appoint Larsa, Vayne's younger brother, as the puppet emperor, but Vayne isn't going to have that. It would completely undermine his house's power and authority. So what does he do? He murders the Emperor, his own father may I remind you, and frames the Senate so that he can have the Senate dissolved and give himself emergency powers with which to rule. However, there are a few funny things about this turn of events. First off, the fact that the Emperor may or may not have been in on it. I mean, this here is the last scene the two of them share together.
So, you would dirty your hands to keep his clean.
My hands are stained with blood. I see little reason to stay them now.
So they are. And so House Solador lives on.
It's also established by this point that the Emperor is already dying of mysterious cough-itis, so maybe he figured that he'd use his death to the house's advantage. It's entirely possible. Then there's Larsa. Now, it's true that Vayne doesn't want to see Larsa become a puppet of the Senate, but there are a few points in the game where it feels like maybe he does want Larsa to become the Emperor in some capacity. But here's the thing about Larsa. He's this pure, sincere cinnamon roll of a person, and no one wants to see him get blood on his hands from taking over the world. So Vayne figures he'll take over the world and do all the dirty work and let Larsa become the Emperor afterwards. With this interpretation in mind, their interactions can be read in a whole different light, particularly this interaction late in the game.
You are mistaken. You are wrong, brother.
And if I am? You had best find the strength you need to correct me then.
There's a lot you can read into that. Now, I sort of mentioned this before, but part of Vayne's appeal to me has always been the fact that compared to all the other Final Fantasy villains, Vayne is just a guy. I mean, sure, he commands military authority and he's a charismatic politician, but he's just human. There's nothing special about him. Heck, as far as I'm aware, he's the only villain in the series to use martial arts when you fight him instead of using a giant freaking sword or magic powers. Add to that his relationship to his brother and the camaraderie he has with the other villains, and you have the most human main villain in the entire series. He's like the one villain in the entire series I could see myself going out to eat lunch with. We get more of this when he becomes the consul to Dalmasca. Now, bear in mind, Dalmasca is the territory that he invaded and he conquered, so the populace doesn't exactly greet him very warmly.
Is it with hatred you look upon your consul? With hatred you look upon the Empire?
Spit on your empire! Go back to Arcadia!
There was little point in asking.
But Vayne is able to get them to start cheering for him with a grand total of one speech, and we find out throughout the game that he actually took his duties as consul seriously and was a pretty well-respected ruler. He's just so likable and his motivations are so interesting that you almost want to root for him until you remember, oh yeah, he's a puppy-kicking sociopath who wants to take over the world. Which brings us to the final battles against him. His first phase he uses martial arts, which like I said before, makes him really unique compared to the other villains. In his second form, he gets all hopped up on magicite and, well, he looks... well...
Kill me with fire!
And then in his final phase, he becomes the Undying, fusing together with Venat and using the remains of his battleship as armor. His design is incredibly busy and convoluted and there's way too much going on, but the fight itself is actually really good. Even if it is kind of annoying when he randomly stops taking damage halfway through. At the very end, even when he's defeated, he achieved everything that he wanted. Mankind is cut off from the Acuria, and his younger brother gets to be put in charge of a massive empire, thus ensuring that House Solidor would live on, so it's not like his plans failed. In the end, Vayne is sympathetic, charismatic, really intelligent, and overall just the most underrated villain in the entire series. Although he could probably do with a haircut.